Thank you. I need to make a correction on that. There is somebody better than me to give this lecture, and that's all of you. It's the future of India that we talk about when we talk about sustainability. What does sustainable mean other than something that will continue into the future? And the future is yours. It's not belong to people like me who are already over the hill. But I'd like to share with you some of the things I've learned since I was your age about the kind of world that we live in and the kind of world that my generation is leaving behind, which I'm afraid is going to leave you a little sick in the stomach by the time I'm through with you, and I hope sufficiently angry and outraged that some of you will decide that's not the way we want to be any longer. The whole point of sustainable development is not really just to learn about how to fix this or make that green. It's about how to make a world that's going to be better for us and for our children and for all the living creatures around us. So the message that I have with you is something that is profoundly important. It's a fundamental set of issues. And I want you to be able to stop me at any time, either if you disagree with what I say, or if you have a question that you want to ask because you didn't understand what I said. Sometimes I speak too fast, sometimes I speak obscurely. So you're welcome just to put up your hand, and we will deal with the questions as we go along. We have a couple of hours ahead of us, so we have plenty of time. And I'm going to actually take you through a journey that is really long and somewhat complex. It's such a long and complex journey that I had to whittle it down in order to fit it into 2 hours. And I hope that I will be able to convey to you the kinds of things that keep me awake at night. And it's not my mission to keep you awake at night, but at least during the daytime, you can say to yourselves, we're going to leave the world better than we found it, which is unlike the previous generation that's leaving it for you. The people in my office are taught that they never go anywhere without a notebook and write all day long the things that they see and do. But this one occasion, I'm going to absolve you from the need to have a notebook, because you can see almost everything I have in one or more of these websites. These websites have a large number of illustrated examples of the kinds that I'm going to be talking about. And particularly the last one, which is my personal website, connects you to all the other ones. So all you need to do is to remember this last one, which will take you into a variety of things. My concerns over a lifetime grew. I was a refugee. I was a refugee from Lahore in late 1947. And where did I go to? I went to Kashmir. So I was a refugee for a second time within a month. And again, we fled from Kashmir to Delhi. I was privileged. My father was a professor in Punjab, and then he became an ambassador. So I grew up overseas. Most of my education after the age of 8 was in England and in Europe and in America. And I wanted to be a physicist. I wanted to be a real scientist, working in a laboratory, finding out about the workings of nature. And I did my PhD in experimental physics. It was great fun, and I enjoyed it. But I realized that I was always going to come back to India. You know, in the 60s, when I was growing up, most people were going away. They were all arriving in the US to make a new life for themselves over there. And I was the one who was coming back, and they could never understand why. But India was what I was. So I wanted to be, like all of you do, a good citizen. And I spent a good part of my time learning everything I needed to know to be a good citizen. So at night, I used to do my PhD work, in the laboratory because I had the laboratory all to myself, lots of money, lots of equipment. But during the daytime, I took courses in everything under the sun. I took courses in economics and business and literature and whatever I thought would be useful when I grow up. And one of the things I did was to get very, very deeply into the issues of development, which led me into environment, which led me into population. So I was privileged to be at a good university, Harvard, where you could do all these things and the professors wouldn't kick you out because you were doing all these other things. But the thing that really transformed my life was a chance encounter with one of the truly great men I ever worked with, Professor Roger Revelle, who was the man who actually discovered the initial findings for climate change. He wrote the first paper that started the whole process of understanding climate change. Roger was a true giant of science, of humanities. He knew everything. He understood life and he understood science. He was an oceanographer. Had he been a physicist or a chemist or a medical person, he would have certainly had a Nobel Prize. He was an amazing person. And he invited me to help him set up the first course on the environment in the world at a university level. And it was called Natural Sciences 118. It became very famous. Two of our students, we had many, many people who became very eminent later on, but two of them, one of them was Al Gore, another one was Benazir Bhutto, who was in those days called Pinky, and we had all kinds of terrific students who forced us to push the frontiers of what we were doing. And already in 1964, when I started the course, we were thinking about environment in ways that now we would call sustainable development. Of course, at that time, it was a very restricted area. There were issues about pollution, there were issues about acid rain, there was issues about some DDT in penguins, and a few things of the sort that you worry about in the 1950s and 60s. But basically, environment is a much bigger issue. In fact, it's such a big issue that the word environment sometimes restricts us. And that's why later on we came to the conclusion we had to redefine it in terms of its relationship with development, and came up with this word sustainable development in the 1980s. Okay, so I'd like to start by sharing with you my basic premises. These are my mindset issues. And if you disagree with my premises, you better stop me because the rest of my story follows from these premises. So I'm going to tell you right up front where I come from. I come from the idea that people count. Oops, you cannot read that. Is there a way to get rid of that microphone off of the other side? No. It's not from my machine. Anyway, people count. If you can see that. All people count. Nature counts. The future counts. And people's behavior counts. Look at that slide for a second because I'm going to be coming back to it. It's an important slide in my life today, so I will be telling you a little more about it. Now, clearly, we know that the economy counts. For some people, it's the only thing that counts. But we do know that there are things like natural resources and manufacturing, services and trade and investments. But most important of all, jobs. In our world, and particularly in our country, the fundamental issue that's missing is jobs. And you people must certainly be aware of that. What are you going to do when you pass out of these courses that you're doing here? We're a nation of some 1.2 billion people, and we need to create, God only knows how many. The government doesn't seem to know, but somewhere between 250 and maybe 400 million jobs have to be created. New, modern jobs. So the central focus of what I'm going to talk about today is really people and nature. People. We want to build a nation that is fit for all our children, not just the privileged few. People who live like this, who get their cooking like that. This woman is in a typical village household, cooking her husband's meals and children's meals. And according to WHO, some 400,000, maybe more, women and children die needlessly every year by what is euphemistically called indoor air pollution. They smoke so much of that gunk, the equivalent of 5, 6, 7 packs of cigarettes a day, that their lungs are finished by the time they're 35 or 40. They spend their mornings, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, getting up to go and get water. They have no toilets. They have no modern sources of energy. And they have very little hope. Now, those of us who live in cities sometimes forget that 2/3, 2 people in every 3 in our country, live like the ones in those pictures. So, what I'm here to share with you is a very profound need to share with you how we build a nation that is fit for all our children. Not just you and me and my sons, but for everyone. And there are only 2 things you got to do. It's funny, but it's really quite simple. You need to ensure that every single citizen's needs, basic needs, are met. And you need to ensure that the resource base on which our economy depends, on which individual and communities depend, is maintained for everyone. Let's talk about meeting the basic needs for a second. Basic needs, you know them all: water, regular nourishing food, shelter, secure tenure, health, personal growth, participation, empowerment, personal security for all, not just for a few. And that's fundamental. And, of course, jobs. These are the basic needs that every single Indian citizen is entitled to. Do they have it? Not yet. So, there's also the question of maintaining the resource base. Let's get to that. Our forests, our rivers, our wetlands, our lands and soils, and all the things that go into producing our food and our materials and our water and our well-being. So, we also have to remember that we're not an isolated little island. We are part of a whole world. And what happens in our country affects other people, and what happens elsewhere affects us. So we not only need a healthy and secure resource base in our country, we actually have to ensure that the entire planet is going to continue to be healthy. And our communities will be healthy for all time. And that's the word sustainable. Okay, so let's just quickly look at what a healthy planet looks like. We live together on this planet, and we're connected. We're connected in innumerable ways. We're connected by all the atmosphere, that's climate change. One part of the world, you can't run away. What happens in El Nino out there near Ecuador and Bolivia and Peru impacts the fact that we don't have rain today. The ocean currents. These ocean currents go all over the world, bringing waters and fish and everything else from one place to another. We're connected through our geopolitical instruments like the United Nations and the international mechanisms, huge, complex structures that join us. We're connected by trade, huge amounts of things going back and forth. We're connected by what is called globalization in all kinds of domains, including wastes. Can't get away from each other. And this diagram is one of the most painful of all. You look at this one, it's in Spanish, so don't worry about that. But what it says is that in 1970, dengue fever had reached one country in Latin America, in South America, Colombia. In 10 years, within 10 years, it had spread through virtually the entire northern part of South America, including Brazil, and the Guianas, and Suriname, and Ecuador. And then another 10 years later, in 1990, virtually every country in South America had dengue. 20 years from nothing to an entire continent, except for Chile, had dengue. So diseases connect us. And, of course, communications. This woman has nothing in her life. She's got a few utensils, but she's got a television. And that television not only brings to her, but to her teenage sons and daughters what's going on in the rest of the world, and makes them feel very unhappy why other people have things that they cannot have. So a fit nation needs not just a healthy planet, but also healthy communities. Healthy communities where you have sharing, where you have jobs, where you have all the things that bring good things, social things, into our lives. My thesis for the rest of the morning with you is that is the central subject of everything a country should be thinking about. Government's job is only one, and that is to make sure that she has a decent life. I'm going to ask you a little later on, do you think our government is doing that? My opinion, if we cannot guarantee her a decent life, a full life, a fulfilling life, then we've failed miserably in all that we set out to do in 1947. Well, we know all this distinction between India, the 400 million who sort of live reasonably comfortable lives, and what does it depend on? Depends on growth. Depends on more FDI. Depends on higher sensex. Depends on raising our growth rate. All the things that our prime ministers and ministers of finance and all our leading economists go for in the newspaper every morning when they wake up. This is what they think about. How does this impact the life of that girl? How has it made it possible for those 800 million people who are outside the economy to live, even begin to think about living decent lives? Rising foreign portfolios, bringing in foreign retail. Nice, it's nice. I mean, it would be nice if everybody on Earth could live like that and have shopping malls like that and houses like that, 54 stories high, 27 stories, but each story is double, so it'd be nice. This is a projected new development for Mumbai where each of the apartments has its own swimming pool. It's called Aquaria Grande. There are a few people who can live very well, but they do so at the expense of a lot of other people. And of course, we've had considerable success in building up our millionaires and billionaires. India is now supposed to have 48 billionaires. And You can't read it, I'm sorry. I goofed up on my font size. And about 100,000 millionaires. And then there is the other 800 million, the Bharat. And Bharat lives like this. This is a lady who works in an area where I work, in Bundelkhand. My organization, Development Alternatives, has sizable programs in this area for the last many decades. And we work with people like this, and we try to see how we can improve them. But every time I go there, there's a new set of families like that. What's remarkable about that picture is that when you look at it, you see that everything that woman owns, possesses, is in that picture. I don't think it would be a great exaggeration to say the whole of her world is in that picture. So one has to wonder how we can justify our lifestyles when 800 million people live under those conditions. You remember that 54-story house I showed you? Well, from the top floor, this is what you see. And this is how our women fetch their water every day. Government says 230 million, 300 million. They vary a little bit. But you know what that 300 million is? That's also according to WHO standards. WHO standards say that if there is a point of water within 1.6 kilometers, you count it as having clean drinking water. Anybody beyond that has to walk more than a mile each way is counted as not having drinking water. Now, can you imagine every night when you feel like a glass of water, you get thirsty, you're going to get up and go 1 mile to get a glass and come back? I don't think we would accept that. But that's basically where it is. We know exactly how much FDI is coming in. We know exactly how much money is coming in the form of portfolio investment and everything else. But we have no idea how many poor people there are. Mr. Arjun Sengupta said, God bless his soul, when he was alive, there are 77% people below the poverty line. There are so many different estimates, and Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia has put his money down here somewhere around 35%, half. Now, if you've got numbers which vary from 35 to 75, you don't even know what's going on. Why is it that we know so exactly how much our GDP grew last month, and we have no idea how many people are suffering from complete extreme deprivation? Many of them hungry every night. These are the statistics, officially, of hungry people in India, in the millions. This is the employment. And it's an interesting graph, this, because in 1991, we introduced liberalization. I want you to remember this graph because I'll be coming back to it. We introduced liberalization in 1991. The organized private sector was hovering around, what, 8 or 10 million jobs. The organized public sector was hovering around 19 or 20 million jobs. Well, today, 20 years later, the sum total is less than what it was in 1991. What is FDI going to do for the creation of jobs? You have it right in that picture. Any amount of money that you've invested, thousands and lakhs of crores you've given away to exporters and to people running away with your subsidies to build factories they don't build and refineries that they don't produce, and you've ended up with fewer jobs than when you started. This is not to say that liberalization is bad. It's just that liberalization has to be designed for a purpose. And that purpose isn't to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. God knows before 1991 our economy was suffering even worse maybe. But we didn't take care of the basics by what we did. This is the employment data. Basically just shows you that that's the private sector, that's the organized public sector, this is the non-agricultural sector, the so-called informal sector, and that's agriculture. And all our policy making is geared for this. All of it. How can that be sustainable? I'm here to tell you about what I think about a sustainable future for our country. Then you've got to think about this. And unemployment is just going out of bounds. So it's pretty obvious that we're in trouble. The country's got fever. The planet, the Earth has got high fever right now. It's got increasing poverty. It's got increasing population, pollution, climate changes, biodiversity loss, resources being depleted at an enormous rate. I'll be coming to that in a minute. Society breaking down, alienation, people going in and shooting people up, finance. Even their treasured and cherished financing system is breaking down and has to be rescued all the time. These are diseases that are life-threatening. They're terminal diseases. And actually, there are two of them. One of them is affluenza. It's a bad disease. This one seduces you because it feels good for a while, but it's terminal. And I'll show you in a minute how. It wants more consumption. It creates climate change. It creates global warming. It uses up our fossil fuels at an enormous rate. In fact, now we're on our way down. There are new discoveries in places like the Mediterranean and Ethiopia and all kinds of places, but they're going to buy you a few extra years. The total amount that they will give you, at the rates that we're using up, you might get another 2 or 3 decades. Originally, it was estimated that by 2030 we won't have any. Now it'll be 2050. But that's in your lifetimes. You won't have retired by then. So don't let all this talk about shale oil and fracking and everything else seduce you. That is just going to buy you a few extra, and the fall will be much worse. And it's not just oil. Food production. I will show you a graph in a second about food production. Topsoil. One of the most worrying things is the loss of phosphorus. The phosphorus cycle now is really in serious trouble. And you know you can't grow food without phosphorus. Phosphates are essential for any crop. The fish, the highest production of fish ever was at the beginning of the century, of this millennium, around year 2000, was around 95 to 100 million tons. Now, with more